Good morning, Chairman Roberts, Ranking Member Stabenow, members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to testify today. It's an honor to testify in the Senate and before this committee. I'm going to take a different approach to talking about these issues at somewhat of a macro level. I believe the best way to think about the CFTC, its reauthorization, its funding, and derivatives regulation more broadly is by thinking about what has become a dirty four-letter word, TARP. Those of you who were here in the Senate or in the House at the time had to take one of the most searing and consequential votes of your careers with no time and little information. You had to decide to vote for or against sending $700 billion taxpayer dollars to bail out the largest financial institutions in this country, including every one of the largest derivative dealers. I was on the Senate floor during those days of debates and votes in September and October of 2008 with Senator Grassley and Senator Thune and Senator Casey and actually most of you here. And I well remember the agony and anger of members being forced to make momentous decisions in a time of extremely limited information, where the facts were changing daily, sometimes hourly, on an hourly basis, and where the gravity of the situation grew more ominous by the moment. The entire financial system was going to collapse, you were told. The payment system was going to stop. Your constituents were not going to be able to cash their paychecks. Indeed, the country was likely to fall into an economic abyss that was so bad it was going to be a second Great Depression, you were told. Those were truly dark, dangerous, and downright scary days and weeks, as one unimaginable event after another happened. Financial giants were collapsing. Others were teetering on the brink of collapse. The stock market's plummeting. This ignited the worst panic since 1929. That was because the markets, the financial giants that ruled the markets, and their products had been largely deregulated. As a result, no one, not market participants, not regulators, not policymakers, and not elected officials, knew what was happening, or worse, what was going to happen next. In the middle of all that, with events happening quickly, little information, widespread fear, you were asked to send $700 billion taxpayer dollars, your constituents' money, to bail out the largest financial institutions in this country and prevent an economic catastrophe. 74 U.S. senators voted for TARP, and days later, $125 billion of taxpayer dollars went out the door into the accounts of just 9 of the largest financial institutions, including all the big derivatives dealers. And that was just the tip of the bailout iceberg. Trillions more, with a T, trillions more were spent, lent, pledged, guaranteed, or otherwise used by the government to prop up and bail out the financial system. Most of that was done by the Federal Reserve, and it was kept secret from the public, including you, the elected officials, for many years. And those weren't the only bailout costs. There were also widespread economic and human costs. Better Markets did a study showing that the cost of the crisis is going to exceed $20 trillion in lost GDP and counting. Now, as you know, derivatives are at the core of causing and spreading the disaster, requiring the TARP vote and inflicting so much pain and misery. In fact, the central role derivatives played in that crisis is why I have suggested that derivatives should be thought of as a conveyor belt, distributing, as Warren Buffett said, the financial weapons of mass destruction throughout the U.S. and global financial systems. Without unregulated, non-transparent, over-the-counter derivatives and the enormous risks they spread and amplified, the 2008 crash would have been very, very different, and almost assuredly would have been much less severe. And that's why the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Act spent so much time on regulating derivatives, ensuring transparency, trading, competition, oversight, accountability. And while other agencies have roles to play, the primary agency standing between that derivatives nightmare from happening again is the CFTC. And the primary people ensuring that the CFTC has the authority and resources to prevent that derivatives nightmare from happening again is you and your colleagues in the Senate and the House. So in closing, when thinking about that, I'd urge you to look at page 20 of our testimony, and I apologize, it's page 20 and not page 4 or 5, of my written testimony. There's a list of the 42 financial institutions that received more taxpayer money from TARP than the CFTC's entire budget in 2019. And that's why reauthorization and properly funding the CFTC today are as important as your TARP vote in 2008, because only getting that right will reduce the likelihood of future votes where you have to again send taxpayer money to bail out Wall Street's derivatives dealers. And that should be uppermost in your mind. That's why we need authorization. That's why we need a CFTC with funding and resources and authority. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.